if you want to have a better run correction system, you got to be able to control your population, because if you got too many people, quality diminishes. And so you're going to control it front end, back end, as best you can, which we'll talk about today. But that's not independent from legislative and statutory mandates. And so one of the things that we did here as part of the 5-year plan was we began in a way that had never been done before to use the Department of Corrections as a base of operations within the administration to push for improved policy in areas that, not corrections per se, but drove the population. So we have, with the research staff, which has gained, as I mentioned last night over dinner, a higher kind of rank in the agency in many ways, we started creating recommendations for reforms to sentencing policy. And it was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because we're the only ones who were doing it, and somebody had to do it, so that was good. But a curse because as soon as we touched it, it appeared to be self-serving and not at all what anybody was used to hearing. And, you kind of hear grumbling or out and out, protests that, of course the Department of Correction wants sentencing reform because you don't want, so many people in prison. You just want to let them all out anyway. But that it seems to me that in the grand scope of some of the work y'all doing with the Noble Morris project, that may be a theme.
We readily admitted that we cannot do this work by ourselves, that the population that we are serving actually has been out there and being served by many other of the partners, and perhaps they didn't do the job that they could have done with them too, or perhaps we wouldn't have gotten them. It kind of gave a way for all of these interests to come together to say, hey, maybe collectively and collaboratively we can join in and pool our interest from all these various sectors and together do a much better job of dealing with this difficult population than we can if we reside in our silos as we have been in the past.
We began to engage our stakeholder base on terms of a public safety issue. That raised the Department of Corrections on the level of where they were all along, and that we need to be engaged in a public safety issue in terms of, are we preparing these offenders for reentry? What are we doing? Let's examine what we're doing. And the analogy that I like is building the plane as you go. I think is true, and I think essential. I think you have to, because the very mechanics and the players that build that plane have to sustain that plane after it's built. And who better than they, in terms of knowing the ins and the outs, the controls, the switches. They help build this thing. And as we moved along in this process, we've brought in technical assistance at needed points. A great example is collaborative case management, evidence-based practices, developing a training model which is multidisciplinary. And in those seats, in those training rooms that we have, are representatives from our prison administration, our prison folks, as well as our local field agents, as well as our community stakeholder partners. They're all there together, and it's localized. And when you do that, you begin to get them together collectively to engage and focus on issues that are relative to what they do and where they work. And that changes the dynamic of what they are actually doing. And that changes culture, because now our prison folks are now working with our agents, and our agents are working with our prison folks, and all of them are working with our stakeholders on the same issues of public safety and preparing folks for reentry, bridging the gap between prison and the community, and sustaining supervision and monitoring and programming once the offenders are released in the community, with a long-term goal of achieving public safety, which is everybody's mission.
We had scattered programs for female offenders, for diversions. We now have a 60-bed unit in our residential reentry program, one of them specifically for females, very gender responsive, set up using our top people in our department in gender responsivity to help us design and make changes. And we have a lot of programs very specifically geared toward the female population there.
Before I became the deputy director, we began a review of our technical return policy for parole violators, and Darlene was a regional administrator at the time, and at one point we were running almost 4,000 technical returns a year, and before my tenure as a deputy and continuing, we've gotten that down to about 2,000.
So that what we do as planners, we bring the right people together that know how to get it done, bring some research to the table to bring that other filter into it, and then design it, and they implement it, and then we track it. At the end of the last year or so, when Pew put out the 13 strategies for effective reentry supervision, we took a look at that here. California actually was doing some work in this regard first, and we looked at what California had put out as kind of their guide, which I think it ended up being pretty much what was in that Pew report. We're doing all that stuff. They're doing that stuff. Now, to what degree and to what quality notwithstanding, there isn't anything in those 13 strategies that this state isn't doing.
The receiving partners in the process are engaged all along in dealing with this case. They're a part of the transition planning, whether it's from the first part of CFA to the middle parts of our reentry process. And it became apparent to us it was from that middle part when we were about to release people to the community, and that's where we started, involving people in that particular part of the transition. And to engage them actively in that planning process. How are these persons going to be serviced? How are their needs going to be met? How is their risk going to be managed once they actually set foot into the community?
I always had in my mind, I always thought was I making a difference? If what I was doing and interacting with this offender, did it make a difference? I always wondered what they were going to do when they got out of prison. I didn't have that connection as a corrections officer back then. And I think it's fundamental and important for corrections professionals to understand is that that we need to bring that vision into our prison environment in terms of utilizing our best resources, which are our staff, and which research tells us is that those that work day in and day out with these offenders have great potential in terms of impacting behavior. And based on that research, which we've done and which we've seen other states do, is we've began to expand the vision in terms of purpose, and we bring in programs like collaborative case management to engage our staff, to get them to talk about what it is that they do, what it is that they think they need to do, and where they think the department needs to go on that platform, and take them through this journey with us with CCM. Another thing is we're looking at evidence-based programs as well, as engaging our own staff, which we did last summer, which is our prison staff, and reviewing our own programs, developing our own assessment instrument utilizing assistance with NIC and outside stakeholders, but giving them the power, the